We shall move to any questions. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives.
Deputy Leader.
Leader of the Nationals. Leader of the Nationals.
Yes, you can get it right, mate.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. At a time of a national fuel crisis, which is hurting our farmers, the National Farmers Federation is extremely disappointed with the free trade agreement announced with the European Union today and said Australian farmers, and I quote, will now pay the price for this subpar EU deal for decades to come. Minister, do you really believe this is a good deal for Australian farmers?
Order. Order. Give the call to the Minister for Agriculture, the Minister for Fisheries and Forestry.
Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member opposite for his question. What I'd say to the member opposite is we're strong advocates on this side of the House of farmers and producers, and that's what you've seen from us since we've been in government. That's what you've seen for us in terms of getting our world-class products right across the globe.
Hang on, the Minister. Members on my left, we're not having yelling while the Minister is on her feet. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Albanese Labor government has worked day and night to rebuild our trading relations that we inherited from those opposite when they left office. Let's be honest about it. They left us with trade impediments of billions and billions of dollars. And indeed, today's Australia-EU free trade agreement represents an opportunity for Australian farmers, fishers and other agricultural producers. It's not only an important outcome at a time of global trade uncertainty, it further supports the diversification of our agricultural products and our agricultural exports. The EU is the world's second largest economy and Australia's third largest two-way trading partner, with our agricultural exports to the EU valued at $4 billion in 2025. This figure is set to grow under the Free Trade Agreement, which will ensure more EU consumers can continue to access Australia's high-quality food and fibre. The agreement eliminates the vast majority of EU tariffs on agricultural products. It will support around $17 million in tariff savings for wine based on current trade, along with a reduction in testing requirements, removing red tape and reducing export overheads.
Order. The Minister was up. Just resume your seat for a moment, please. Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives. The Minister was asked a question about does she believe this is a good deal. She is going through exactly what she was asked about the deal she was asked. So I know the Leader would like a yes-no answer, but the Minister is being directly relevant. So at this stage, I'm not prepared to take the point of order. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Chief Executive of Australian Grape and Wine, Mr Lee McLean, said today, and I quote, "The removal of tariffs on Australian wine entering the EU is good news for our exporters and for the long-term competitiveness of Australian wine in a major global market." The CEO of Ozveg, who said, and I quote, "Australia achieving an FTA with the European Union..."
The Minister's going to pause. I was just to pause for a moment while she's concluding her answer. I was very clear I did not want yelling during this Minister's answers. The member for Maranoa has ignored me, so he'll leave the chamber under 94A. To have a continuing force of noise there when the Minister is updating the House on what she was asked about, she'll continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I was about to quote the CEO of Ozveg, who said, and I quote, "Australia achieving an FTA with the European Union is welcome news, which will benefit Australian grower exporters of onions and other vegetable crops through tariff elimination and reductions." Mr Speaker, on this side of the House we do understand the importance of fair trade and the benefits that it brings to farmers and producers. Our agriculture, fisheries and forestry exports were valued at more than $82 billion in 2025. This is a 38% increase since 2021, the last time that you're in office. This has only been made possible because of the careful and considered approach that we have taken to restoring our international trading relationships.
Give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the Australian Government and the European Union reached historic agreements, bringing us closer together across trade, industry and defence. Why are these agreements important, and how do they deliver for Australians?
Call to the Honourable the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question and for her interest in actually creating jobs in her community, which come from free and fair trade. As a result of this EU agreement, we'll have more Australian beef and sheep meat from Queensland and New South Wales. We'll have more Australian wine from Western Australia and South Australia. We'll have more Australian dairy from Victoria and more seafood from Tasmania. All proudly Australian products, the very best in the world, the very best in the world. After 8 years of negotiation, something that couldn't be done by those opposite, we have today signed the Australia-EU Free Trade Agreement. It represents a very good deal for exporters, for Australian consumers and businesses gaining more access to European products here at home at lower prices. The EU is the world's second largest economy and our third largest trading partner. Deepening cooperation in trade is important to both of our economies, just as strengthening our defence ties is important for our security as well. And today we've signed a new security and defence partnership, boosting Australia-EU collaboration across defence industry, maritime security, cyber security, as well as countering terrorism and disinformation. Together, at a time of global uncertainty, with trade in flux, we are acting on both security and prosperity. And it was a pleasure to hear the President's address to Parliament, the first female leader to do so, with such warmth, friendship and good humour. Mr Speaker, I see comments about beef and sheep from those opposite. Let me just give a few facts. When we were elected in 2022, beef exports to Europe were worth beef exports in total were worth $9 billion. It's now $18 billion. $18 billion. Double. Last year, beef to the European Union was 4,000 tonnes. 4,000 tonnes. This agreement provides for guaranteed preferential access for 35,000 tonnes. 4,000, 35,000. That is the difference. That is the difference. And on sheep meat, so 8 times our current exports, and on sheep meat, this allows for nearly 31,000 tonnes, 5 times our current market access. That is what we have delivered. But those opposite only have 2 modes. 2 modes, talking Australia down and tearing each other down. That is all they do, constantly talk Australia down.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. More than 2 weeks ago, the Minister told the House, quote, "Today the Treasurer and I have worked very closely together with the ACCC to ensure that the ACCC penalties are increased." With fuel prices having doubled in 3 weeks, has the Minister been advised as to when the legislation will actually be introduced?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
I have. Tomorrow.
Give the call to the Honourable Member. Order. Order. When the House comes to order, the Treasurer. Order. The Treasurer will cease objecting. The Leader of the House will cease objecting. We'll hear from the Honourable Member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How will Australia and the European Union strengthen cooperation through the new Security and Defence Partnership?
The call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his distinguished service in the Australian Army. With Kaja Kallas, the Vice President and High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy of the European Commission, the Foreign Minister and myself signed the Australia-EU Security and Defence Partnership. Now, from the moment that Russia and China signed a no-limits agreement on the eve of Russia's immoral and illegal invasion of Ukraine, was the moment that a war in Eastern Europe became deeply relevant to Australia's national interest. Because there are not many rules-based orders, there is one. And the lessons, good and bad, that will be learnt in Ukraine stand to be applied in the Indo-Pacific. And so today there is, in fact, a deep connection between the Indo-Pacific and Europe, which is why this partnership is so important. The partnership will see increased cooperation between Australia and Europe across security and defence, in cyber security, in space, in combating terrorism financing, in sharing information. But really importantly, it will see greater cooperation in defence industry. So many of the platforms that are operated by the Australian Defence Force were designed or built by European companies. Navantia, a Spanish company, designed our air warfare destroyers, our supply ships, our landing helicopter dock ships, the largest ships in the Royal Australian Navy. Thales, a French company, has been building Bushmasters for the Australian Army in Bendigo for many years, and those Bushmasters are now providing critical service in Ukraine. And Rheinmetall, a German company, is building more than 200 combat reconnaissance vehicles, the Boxers, in Brisbane for the Australian Army, but in addition are building another 100 more which are being sent back to Europe for the German Army. And it's against this existing strong backdrop that the partnership will help provide for a seamless defence industrial base between Australia and Europe. Australia and Europe are both democratic. We enjoy freedom of speech. We share values and we have complete trust. And in difficult times, the Australia-EU Security and Defence Partnership will be the basis upon which Australia and Europe will navigate a challenging world together.
Give the call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. For every litre of fuel sold in Australia, the government receives 52.6 cents in excise tax. We are in a cost of living emergency and we must act now. Diesel was increased by over 55% in the last month. This is devastating for regional communities like Mayo. Will the government suspend the fuel excise for 60 days to provide immediate relief for Australians?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mayo for her question, which I think does reflect a level of concern in the Australian community about cost of living pressures and particularly pressures which are being felt at the petrol bowser. Unlike the Shadow Treasurer, the member for Mayo has appropriately represented how the fuel excise works. It's applied per litre of fuel. It doesn't go up when the price of fuel goes up. It's levied per litre. The amount that the member for Mayo mentioned is the accurate one, even if the Shadow Treasurer didn't know that when he was asked. Now, when it comes to the excise, when it comes to the proposal that the member for Mayo has, it's not something that we have been considering. We have been working very hard to provide cost of living relief in the most responsible way that we can. The tax cuts which are coming, rounds 2 and 3, are an important part of that. Cheaper medicines, more bulk billing, student debt relief and the like is all about recognising these pressures and to try and provide that cost of living relief in a different way than the way proposed by the member for Mayo. And in fuel markets more broadly, we're working very closely and as a team to make sure that there is supply that people need, particularly in regional areas, and to also make sure the ACCC is empowered to go after any suppliers or retailers who do the wrong thing. I do acknowledge that there are a range of views about it. The member for Mayo's question, I think, accurately reflects some of the suggestions which are out there. For our part, we're providing cost of living relief. We're working as hard as we can in fuel markets to recognise and respond to the pressures that Australians are under.
Call to the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Trade. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering real economic benefits to Australian workers and families by signing a free trade agreement with the European Union?
The call to the Minister for Northern Australia the Minister of Resources representing the Minister for Trade.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hughes for his great question. I'm really proud to be representing in this place the finest Trade Minister this country has ever seen, in the form of Senator Don Farrell. Under Senator Farrell's leadership and that of the Prime Minister, this government has delivered economic benefits to Australian workers and families. Under the leadership of the Trade Minister and this Prime Minister, this government has removed $20 billion of trade impediments. We have signed an economic cooperation and trade agreement with India, FTAs with the United Kingdom and the United Arab Emirates, and today we have signed an FTA with the European Union. And all this, Mr Speaker, confirms that Labor is the party of free, open and fair trade. After all, it was the Hawke government that lifted the tariff wall in this country and opened our economy up to fair trade. We lifted the tariff walls, we support fair trade, we support free trade, and we are building more and more connections every single day. I want to acknowledge the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, and I echo her views that both continents share the same challenges and goals. We need to maximise our potential together, and through this EU FTA we will do that. This has been 8 years in the making. It's a historic achievement achieved by this government. This European Union agreement combines us with the 27 member states, the second largest economy in the world, with a population of over 450 million people, with a GDP of $31 trillion in 2025. This free trade agreement between Australia and the EU means lower tariffs on imports from the European Union, including what's on shelves at grocery stores right around the nation. Lowering tariffs means more choices at lower prices to help ease cost-of-living pressures at supermarkets right around the country for all Australian families. Farmers and businesses will benefit from cheaper machinery, vehicles, parts and equipment that they source from the EU, and this will flow into households around the country. And really importantly, this government has protected—
The Minister will pause. The Leader of the Nationals in the House of Representatives has had a really good go. I just need to hear what the Minister is saying. So I'm just asking everyone to show a little restraint while the Minister is on her feet, so the House can hear her response to the question that she was asked by the member for Hughes. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you. This government has protected the rights of Australians to keep using words for products they've made for many years, like parmesan and kransky. And this is really important to people of Italian and Polish heritage. Australian winemakers can keep making and selling Prosecco domestically. I know that's very important for the member for Bendigo and others. And there are long phase-out periods for other terms such as Feta Romana and Cuir. And this is important for the marketing of these Australian products for the many Australians with European heritage.
The Minister will pause. The member for Barker, I can hear you from here. You're the furthest on the front bench. I'm not putting up with these interjections anymore. You'll leave the chamber under 94A as well. For 2 hours. My correction, 3 hours. If I'm asking for restraint in the House and someone ignores the Speaker, then I ask them to leave and they continue to interject on the way out, there will be severe consequences. I think that's only common sense and common courtesy. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is a heritage many are proud of in this country, and indeed it's a heritage and a shared future that we are proud of, an Australian Labor government that has delivered a European Union-Australian free trade agreement.
Call to the honourable member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. On the 10th of March 2026, the Minister stated, and I quote, "The fact of the matter is we've got enough diesel in Australia for our needs for the foreseeable future, and it's important that government and industry are working together." Can the Minister advise the House as to how many service stations in each state and territory are currently out of fuel?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for the question. In New South Wales, the figure is 164 without diesel, 289 without at least one type of fuel. In Queensland, the figure is 55 with no diesel, 35 with no regular unleaded. That's out of 1,800 service stations. I should have said in New South Wales those figures are out of 2,417 service stations. In Victoria, the figure is 162 with one or more grades unavailable out of 1,627 service stations. In South Australia, it's 46 with one or more grades unavailable out of 700. In Western Australia, I'm advised it's 6 out of 771 with a total stock out. In Tasmania, it is 1 with no diesel and 6 with no unleaded out of 250 service stations. In Northern Territory, the Northern Territory Administration advises me that there are no shortages as a result of fuel supply, but there are, of course, issues in relation to flooding and road access, and there are no outages in the ACT.
Before I call the member for Dickson, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are 120 senior school students from across Australia who have been selected to participate in the 31st National Schools Constitutional Convention. Welcome to you all. I'm also pleased to inform in the gallery is a group of 10 young people attending a Civics Engagement Youth Advisory Group. Welcome to you as well. And now I give the call to the member for Dickson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working with the states and territories, industry and our international partners to respond to the ongoing disruptions to global trade caused by the war in the Middle East?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the fantastic member for Dickson for the question. And as we heard from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and as most people around the world would recognise, this is a global issue, and there are global pressures on trade, there are global pressures on energy supply, there are global pressures on inflation as a result of the actions, particularly of the Iranian regime, which is engaged in attacks on neighbouring nations in the Middle East and effectively closed to almost all traffic, the Strait of Hormuz. It is imperative that freedom of navigation in the region recommence unhindered, and we again reiterate Australia's call for Iran to cease this reckless action, which is having consequences of isolating itself even further from decent people right around the world because of the actions and the reckless way in which they are seeking to damage ordinary people, ordinary citizens of people in their region of the Middle East, but right around the world. Disruption to 20% of the world's oil supply is continuing to impact nations, and indeed we heard that as well about the impact of these actions on the economies of Europe. We live in a world which is more connected than ever before, where no one is immune from these shocks, and we know that increased petrol prices put pressure on Australians. And that's why it's so important to work with every partner that we can, both at home and overseas, to shield our nation as best as possible from the worst of global uncertainty. That's why I engaged with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong of Singapore and issued a statement yesterday, a joint statement with him. That's why we invited and had the Executive Director of the IEA, Dr Birrell, here in Australia, why we discussed with him yesterday afternoon, and why we're continuing to engage right across senior members of the government with our partners in the region. The Commonwealth is continuing to lead on supply, and we're coordinating action with the states and territories as well, who have a key role in the distribution of fuel across the nation. Earlier today, I met with the coordinator, Anthea Harris. She's coordinating. She's convened a meeting already today of the different state coordinators who've been appointed as a result of the National Cabinet meeting that I organised last Thursday through the establishment of the Fuel Supply Task Force. Now, this is important to coordinate the activity right across different levels of government with the national response. We continue to drive this agenda as well. Part of the agenda has to be to make our economy more resilient. That's one of the lessons that we learned from COVID, and it's one of the lessons that we're being reminded of right now with this issue.
Call to the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, what is your plan to get fuel to the more than 400 service stations that have no fuel?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The government's plan is to work to increase the fuel supply in Australia by releasing 20% of the minimum stock obligation, which we have done. And we have done so on the condition from the minimum stock entities that they see that fuel flowing to regional Australia. And that has been entered into and has been implemented. I also announced a temporary relaxation of the rules for sulphur for petrol, which will see an extra 100 million litres of fuel be supplied to the system each month. In addition, Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister has convened National Cabinet, I've convened energy ministers, and we have agreed to keep working together on contingency plans, and we will work every day with refiners, with suppliers, to ensure that that fuel flows to where there are real shortages, Mr Speaker, where there are real shortages as a result of the increases in demand that we have seen across Australia. Now, the Leader of the Opposition interjects, which I'll take, Mr Speaker. He says there's only increases in demand. Well, if the Leader of the Opposition could point to one ship that hasn't arrived or one refinery that isn't working. No. As the government has made clear on multiple occasions, every ship that has been expected has arrived. We have very transparently said, Mr Speaker, that there have been cancellations in April. The Leader of the Opposition is the one who has misled people and said that we are stopping exports from Australia, which is not true.
The manager on a point of order.
Goes to direct relevance, Speaker. The question wasn't about the Leader of the Opposition. Right. It was about your...
Yeah. Order. The manager has made his point of order. He was correct. He wasn't asked about the Leader of the Opposition. But if the Leader of the Opposition interjects and... Order. Members on my right, the Minister. So to make sure he's not talking about the Opposition, I would suggest no one from the Opposition interjects, so he doesn't take the interjection. The Minister in continuation.
So, Mr Speaker, the government will work with anyone of goodwill, as we have done across the board. We have not heard a single constructive suggestion from the opposition in this. Not a single one, Mr Speaker. There's been plenty of sledging and no solutions. There's been plenty of insults but no ideas, Mr Speaker. All we have seen is politics and negativity. My attention. I'm asked about fuel shortages. Mr Speaker.
The manager's taken a point of order, so on relevance he won't be able to do it again.
No. Speaker, the Minister is defying your ruling.
He was just in mid-sentence saying he's asked about fuel shortages and the plan, and he's talking about that. So you missed the boat there. The Minister.
I was asked about fuel shortages.
Order.
To give credit where it's due, nobody in the leadership group, but some Liberal and National Party members have been to see me to talk to me about issues in their electorate in good faith, and they would concede that we have worked well together, Mr Speaker. We have worked well together to do that. I'll continue to do that. But the leadership of the Liberal Party has chosen partisanship, not patriotism, and they should hang their heads in shame.
Order. We'll give the call to the honourable member for Corwell.
Thank you, Speaker.
The member for Corwell has
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the Minister update the House on Australia's fuel supply? How has the Albanese Labor government acted to strengthen our fuel supply?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Honourable friend for the question and for everything he's done in his house since he arrived here this year, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, we've heard this week from the President of the European Commission and the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency about just how acute this international crisis is, and both have made the point that no country is immune from its impacts, a point the Prime Minister and I and the entire government have been making now for the best part of a month. That there will be impacts, and we need to prepare and we need to ensure that we use this as an opportunity to increase our sovereign capability as well. And on Friday last in Brisbane, I announced changes to the Fuel Security Services payment to ensure that our 2 existing refineries continue to operate, Mr Speaker. After a decade where we saw the deindustrialisation of Australian refining and saw 4 refineries shut their operations in Australia, enough. And no refinery will close under the Albanese government, and the payments we announced on Friday in Brisbane will ensure that that is the case. And I'm very pleased to be able to work with the refiners to ensure that that is the case. And today, Mr Speaker, I can announce further measures as well, because we continue to see shortages in diesel. Despite the fact our national stocks are strong and imports continue to arrive, we continue to see shortages around the country, as honourable members have said. And so we should do everything sensible to increase supply. So I can announce today that I have changed the diesel standards when it comes to the combustion temperature and allowed a slightly lower combustion temperature of 60.5 degrees, which is called the flash point, Mr Speaker, which provides a little more flexibility to importers as to what diesel we can import into Australia, and a little more flexibility for refiners to switch between fuels as well. These are practical measures, Mr Speaker, not suggested by the opposition, not suggested at any point by any member opposite, but taken by us, Mr Speaker, to get the job done. Because these are the sorts of practical things which add to what we've already done. Increasing or releasing 20% of the minimum stock obligation. Not an easy decision, not a decision lightly taken, but 100% the right decision in the circumstances, and not just released carte blanche, but released on the condition from those entities that they will see the stock market, the spot market and the regional areas supply. That is having an effect now. The increase in sulphur rules, which could not apply to diesel, despite some members opposite saying it should, simply could not be allowed to be applied to diesel. And today, this flashpoint decision, which will see additional diesel supply into Australia, which will see increased supply from our refiners as well, increased flexibility for our refiners. These are practical measures taken by a government taking action in the face of international uncertainty, when all we have seen from the opposition is partisanship, not patriotism.
Give the call to the honourable member for Grey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. I refer to the front page of today's Sydney Morning Herald with an article titled "States Warn Albanese of Fuel Ration Confusion." Have any state and territory energy ministers requested that the federal government prepare a fuel rationing plan?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, I refer the honourable gentleman to my answer yesterday, in which I confirmed to the House the great revelation that the energy ministers have met last Friday and issued a communique, which is not a secret document, Mr Speaker, and for the benefit of honourable members opposite, the communique reads, in part, ministers agreed that there are shared responsibilities and it will be critical to work together to maintain fuel security by anticipating risks and enabling timely, coordinated responses. Ministers tasked senior officials to regularly report on fuel security and potential responses. Ministers will continue to monitor fuel supplies and work together to respond as the situation evolves. Mr Speaker, a communique.
Well, the question. Just resume your seat for a moment, Manager. The question was about a media report that Member Grey asked about had meetings or requests been to lead to fuel rationing plans. The Minister was answering directly that part of the question when he was on his feet about what they had discussed, what the ministers had discussed and what the requests, I assume, were that led to that. So that is pretty directly relevant. So we just have to agree to disagree. But in this case, I'm going to endorse what the minister is saying because he is being directly relevant about the question he was asked. But on a point of order,
Speaker, just on your statement there, the question was really specific, and this is really important. Really important. It goes to a significant national issue. No, can you?
People want to know.
It's
members on my right. Yep. So
about a fuel rationing plan, and that is the minister isn't addressing that.
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, to the point of order, almost every time a point of order is taken by those opposite, particularly the Manager of Opposition Business on direct relevance, they then pretend that a whole lot of the words of the question were not there. Now, the start of this question referred to an article on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. I've just had a look at the full contents of that article. It goes through a broad range of issues. It refers at length to the Prime Minister's speech last night, to if you're going to have those words in the question, then they become part of direct relevance in the answer.
Yeah. I'm just going to. I've given the manager a good go. You can just resume your seat. We heard from you. That's fine. No, resume your seat. Resume your seat. Order. Yes, I understand that. But common sense would prevail. If a member is asking about an article, you just don't refer to the title of the article. It's about the article itself. But we're not getting into the semantics here. Order. We just want to make sure that the minister is being directly relevant about the issue of fuel rationing that he was asked about as part of the article that he was asked about. So the minister in continuation.
Mr Speaker, as I've previously said in the House as well, the Commonwealth and the states are working together off the frame of the National Liquid Fuel Emergency Response Plan, which is a document that's existed under governments of all persuasions for the last 20 years. Just as in COVID, where the Morrison government worked with states, the Albanese government is working with states on contingency planning, on all the measures. The difference now, Mr Speaker, is that during COVID the Morrison government had an opposition which was constructive. The Morrison government had an opposition which made policy suggestions, Mr Speaker, which gave support to controversial measures, when it didn't have to, Mr Speaker. I mean, I was Shadow Minister. I remember Labor Party members complaining to me, you're being too soft on the Morrison government, you shouldn't give them that much support. I said, that would not be good for the country, Mr Speaker. That would not be good for Australia. But the Taylor opposition sees an international crisis as a political point-scoring opportunity, not an opportunity to be adults in the room, and I suspect, Mr Australia, the Australian people will have views about that performance.
Order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What steps is the Albanese Labor government taking in relation to fuel supply and affordability? How does this compare with other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, I hope it's okay that I also shout out the National Schools Constitutional Convention friends who've joined us today, and I thank the member for Macarthur for his question. As a wonderful local member in an outer metro community, a bit like mine, I know that he understands the pressures that people are feeling right around Australia. Australians are under cost of living pressure, and the conflict in the Middle East is adding to that pressure. We recognise that, but more than recognise that, we're taking action to help address it. Tomorrow, as the Energy Minister said, we'll introduce new legislation to help consumers get a fair go at the petrol pump, with bigger penalties for misconduct in the fuel sector. Now, the conflict overseas is no excuse for suppliers or servos to take advantage of Australians, Mr Speaker. We are putting the petrol companies on notice. Our new laws will double the penalties for false or misleading conduct and cartel behaviour to a maximum of $100 million per offence, Mr Speaker. That means bigger penalties for any servos and suppliers that rip off Australian motorists. It's on top of all of the other action we're taking to address fuel affordability and security, Mr Speaker. Supporting our refineries, as the minister said, boosting fuel supply, getting more fuel into the market, working with industry and international partners, empowering the ACCC. And, Mr Speaker, late last year we also legislated to strengthen Australia's fuel security back then, towards the end of last year, and the explanatory memorandum of our legislation said it would ensure the government is well placed to efficiently respond to potential shortages of critical fuels. The bill amended the minimum stockholding obligation to help us manage critical fuel shortages. It facilitated more information gathering, It was about fuel-related products critical to Australia's trucking industry, diesel exhaust fluid and technical-grade urea. It was all about making sure that we could respond to situations like this. And, Mr Speaker, I remind the House that those opposite voted against fuel security at the end of last year. They had the opportunity to support some sensible measures to make it easier for Australia to deal with and respond to threats to our fuel security, and they voted against it. Mr Speaker, I call on them to not make the same mistake again when it comes to bigger penalties for servos and suppliers who are doing the wrong thing. We call on them to back this bill to put in place higher penalties for petrol companies and to protect motorists, Mr Speaker. Our legislation is all about a fair go for Australians at the petrol pump.
The Treasurer will pause. The Treasurer will pause. The Shadow Treasurer is interjecting way too much. This is first and final warning because we won't be having the MPI if that continues. So, your call. The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, we are not immune from uncertainty in the global economy. We know that. But this action will help protect consumers and hold petrol suppliers and retailers to account. And as the Energy Minister said, those opposite should stop playing politics, be patriots in this regard and support our legislation.
Call to the honourable member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, the minimum stock holding obligation for liquid fuels only applies to diesel, petrol and jet fuel. It does not apply to bunker fuel, which is a specialised marine fuel oil used by the shipping industry. So, Minister, seeing as shipping is responsible for transporting almost all of our island nations' trade, and indeed Tasmania's trade, will you use your power under the Liquid Fuel Emergency Act to bring the same priority to bunker fuel?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question and the spirit in which he raises it on behalf of his electorate and in the national interest. And, Mr Speaker, the honourable member is right. There are a range of bunker fuels used in domestic and international shipping. Marine fuel is one of the most significant, along with marine diesel. Fuel oil accounted for 1% of Australia's refined product use in 2025. Now, I do know that the Minister for Transport is engaging directly with the maritime sector, and I can tell the member for Clark that I've also engaged directly with the Tasmanian Minister for Energy, and we are working well together. I can also tell the honourable member that, as part of the release of the minimum stock obligation, although the member is right, bunker fuel is not in the minimum stock obligation. Nevertheless, we were able to make a condition of the release of some of the minimum stock obligation, prioritising maritime oil supply for cargo and passenger vessels to Tasmania, ports, fisheries and forestry. So that has been done as part of the MSO release. I can also tell the member for Clark that approximately 13% of the production from Geelong is for fuel oil, and last year total fuel oil production in Australia averaged 23 million litres a month, with the production of fuel oil supported by the announcement I just referred to that we made on Friday of support for our two refineries to ensure that Australian domestic capability. In relation to the honourable member's question about the Liquid Fuel Emergency Act, I've pointed out before that the bar for the test for invoking that Act is very high, quite rightly. It has never been invoked in the last 40 years, not through the two Gulf crises, not through COVID, not at any other time. Of course, it is there to be invoked if necessary, but I'm not envisaging at this point requiring that, and indeed the measures that I refer to show what can be done without invoking that Act.
The call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting truck drivers and road transport businesses to get a fair go, given the impact of the conflict in the Middle East?
The call to the Minister for Employment and the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Blair for his question, because he's someone that always backs Aussie truckers. Now, our road transport industry is vital to keep our nation's economy moving. Without trucks and their drivers, the movement of essential supplies across Australia would stop. It's truckies like Justin, who I met this morning on his overnight stop. He was very generous to talk to me because he hadn't been to sleep yet. but he is one of the many hard-working Australians ensuring that food and goods are delivered to where they're needed. And it's this government that wants to give truckies like Justin a fair go. And that is why our government has passed significant reforms to ensure that our road transport industry is strong and resilient for Australia's future. Of course, we are cracking down on sham contracting and have increased penalties for employers who dodge their obligations to their employees. The government has also introduced strong powers for the Fair Work Commission to set fair minimum standards across the road transport supply chain, ensuring that our truckies and transport operators get a fair go. Now, under the current legislation, the Fair Work Commission must consult when setting contract chain orders for a minimum of 6 months. As our country experiences the impact of the war in the Middle East, our government recognises the need to establish an urgent pathway for truckies to argue for their fair share in the Fair Work Commission. And that is why our government today announced that we will amend the Fair Work Act to enable the Commission to respond more quickly to contract chain order applications in time-sensitive circumstances. This is so truckies and transport operators aren't left to worry about managing rising costs on their own. Now, consultation will not be removed. The Commission will still need to step through its processes, but it will be able to act more quickly, helping to maintain business viability in the current volatile environment. Now, it is critical the costs of rising fuel prices are shared fairly through our supply chain so that our truckies and transport businesses can remain viable. Now, the government's announcement has been widely supported by industry, including the Australian Road Transport Industrial Association, the Australian Road Freighters Association, the Transport Workers Union and the Australian Trucking Association, whose CEO, Matt Munro, today said the ATA stands with the government in full support of its announcement. The question for those opposite, will they stand with Australian truckies when this legislation comes to the Parliament?
Call to the honourable member for McPherson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Have any state or territory energy ministers requested that the federal government prepare a fuel rationing plan?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy.
I refer the honourable gentleman to my previous answer.
Order. Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Transport. How is the Albanese Labor government working to support our transport industry through this fuel shock?
A call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Aston for the question. It was great to join you on Henderson's Road in Knoxfield just last week, one of the great projects that were being built through her electorate. I do want to start by saying we do know how tough it's been for workers in the transport industry over the past few weeks. They drive through the night to get food on our supermarket shelves, medicines to pharmacies and fuel to our petrol stations. It's been particularly challenging to grapple with spikes in demand for fuel delivery across the last few weeks. In the last couple of weeks, they've also been dealing, of course, with rising fuel costs eating into their bottom line. It's why I was so pleased to join with Minister Rishworth this morning to announce the amendments to the Fair Work Act, which will allow for transport operators to apply to renegotiate with their clients quicker so that they can more fairly share the cost of fuel spikes across the supply chain. Currently, the Fair Work Commission cannot deliver a determination for at least 6 months. So with truck operators having such tight margins, they cannot wait. And it's going to be a question for those opposite whether, when that legislation is introduced next week, whether you support it. That's right. With truck operators having such tight margins, they cannot wait, and it would be good if the opposition signalled their support sooner rather than later. Some of the largest supermarkets are already working with the trucking industry to renegotiate contracts, but this should be happening right the way across the board. Government, industry and unions were all united in our support for this change. This is one of the many actions that the Albanese government is taking to address fuel costs and to support businesses and workers across our important transport sector. And we're able to do this because of our close and regular engagement with them. Throughout this time, I've been meeting regularly with representatives from the road transport, rail, aviation and maritime sector, joined by representatives of the fuel industry. Along with providing me and my department updates on impacts of the industry, they're also advising me of the work that they're doing to support the safe arrival of Australians from the Middle East. We know already that over 7,700 Australians have arrived home safely from the UAE and Qatar since the beginning of this conflict, and I do want to particularly give a shout-out and thanks to the pilots and flight crews who have carefully and expertly navigated flights out of the Middle East when it has been safe to do so. Qantas have also been putting on additional flights to Sydney via Singapore, so Australians have more ways to get home and to the world. Our regular engagements across industries have helped inform the actions that this government is taking. That's what you do. You engage with the industry, you work with your departments when you've got times like these, and you do make sure that you're actually being a patriot, not political.
Call to the order. Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the honourable member for Curtin.
Prime Minister, 1,000 days ago, after heartbreaking evidence about the predatory gambling industry, the late Peter Murphy presented our committee report to Parliament with 31 unanimous recommendations to reduce gambling industry harm. The government has still not responded. You claim to have done more than any other government, but none of your actions were in response to the inquiry's recommendations, and Australians still lose more through gambling than any other country. Why won't you respond to Peter Murphy's report?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Curtin for her question, and we certainly recognise this as a real issue, but it's extraordinary for to argue that the measures that the government have put in place have not been in response to the Murphy report. That is just not true. That is just factually wrong. And the fact is we continue to work. Indeed, just this week in Parliament, we're introducing legislation that will stop gambling and tobacco companies from claiming the research and development tax incentive. Until this action is taken by the government, betting firms and poker machine companies are able to claim millions of dollars a year in research and development expenses. We're fixing that. But it also builds on the other actions that we have taken. Banning the use of credit cards for online wagering was one of the recommendations and something that was talked about in evidence before that committee. Establishing mandatory custom ID pre-verification for online wagering, implementing monthly win-loss statements, strengthening classification of video games that contain gambling-like content, and of course launching the National Self-Exclusion Register, BetStop, which has been enormously successful. The recent independent statutory review of BetStop found that users of the National Self-Exclusion Register have testified that it can truly be a game-changer. Ministers and I will continue to engage across the community on this important issue, and we'll continue to report back to the Parliament, and we'll continue to take measure after measure on this issue.
The call to the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. How is the Albanese Labor government strengthening our social security system and delivering cost-of-living relief for Australians, including social security payment recipients? And are there any risks to this?
Call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and thanks so much to the member for Richmond. It was wonderful to visit a great local service that provides emergency relief to her electorate when I was up her way just recently. And I know that, like the member for Richmond, all of us believe that we want people to have jobs. We want them to have good, secure jobs. And since coming to government, we've seen the minimum wage go up $9,000. We've seen tax cuts for every taxpayer, more to come. But when people can't work, of course, they need a social security system that supports them. Or if they're aged pensioners, of course, they deserve to retire with dignity. And that's why we're so proud on this side that last Friday, the 20th of March, more than 5 million social security recipients saw a boost to their payments, a $2.6 billion boost to their payments. In the member for Richmond's electorate, it was 25,480 aged pensioners who saw their pensions go up. We know that Australians are feeling the pinch, and these adjustments help keep up with cost of living changes. The changes that came into effect last Friday saw the full-age pension now $5,500 more than when we came to government. They see job seekers who've got $4,300 a year more since we came to government. Rent assistance has gone up. The maximum rate has gone up by about $1,900 a year since we came to government. And for the first time in 30 years, we've seen an increase to the threshold for the small debt waiver, making sure that our system is fairer and better value for taxpayers. The waiver is now set at $250, so around 1.2 million small debts will not be collected this year. A lot of those debts actually cost more to collect than they return when they're collected. This builds on cheaper medicines. The maximum cost for a script for pensioners now $7.70. A bulk billing boost, 5% deposits for first home buyers, free TAFE, the 20% cut to student debt. We know that those opposite, of course, would put all of that at risk. They love voting against cost of living help for ordinary Australians. Oh, laugh away, you did it. You voted against plenty of these measures. And we know that when they were last in government, despite promising not to touch the aged pension more than 9 times, they actually tried to raise the pension age to 70 when they had the opportunity to do that. Those opposite have not changed. They have not learned. They're the same old Liberals, focused on themselves while we're focused on making life a little bit easier for Australians.
Call to the honourable member for Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns has just said in the New South Wales Parliament in relation to fuel supply, quote, that demand management procedures are required. That might be rationing. It should be a nationally consistent approach, end quote. Does the Minister agree?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question, but perhaps the honourable member didn't take in when I read out the communique from energy ministers when we agreed to work together on coordination measures over coming weeks and months, Mr Speaker. That's why we appointed a supply coordinator to work not just across the federal bureaucracy but across the states to work with industry, because Mr Speaker, that is the appropriate thing to do. But this question, Mr Speaker, this question really goes—
Order. Order. Members on my left and
This question
right.
really goes to the approach of the opposition here. Asking constructive questions about fuel supply, making constructive suggestions, no. Fear-mongering, Mr Speaker, disinformation, that's the opposition's approach.
The minister's concluded his answer. Has the minister concluded it? Has the minister concluded his answer? Yeah. The manager on a point of order.
Relevance, Speaker. This question had nothing to do with the opposition. It was about whether there's going to be a nationally consistent approach to fuel rationing, and what the Australian people want to know an answer.
The manager is correct. It was not about the opposition, so there's not much more. If the minister's got nothing else to add, he'll have to be brief with his remarks. He won't be able to, for the remainder 2 minutes, talk about the opposition. He wasn't asked about that.
I simply say, Mr Speaker, this government will continue to work constructively with state governments and will continue to work constructively with industry and state governments like Tasmanian State Government, which is working very constructively with this government across the field in this difficult environment, Mr Speaker, because that's what sensible adult governments do. That's what serious people do. Non-serious people play politics in an international crisis, Mr Speaker.
Call to the order. The Minister for Employment is warned. Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Members on my left, when they cease interjecting and when the House comes to order, we'll hear from the honourable member for Leichhardt.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government making it easier for Australians to see a doctor when they need urgent care? Why did the government introduce this new model of care, and how does it compare to other policy approaches?
We call to the Minister for Health and Ageing, the Minister for Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker. I know the member for Leichhardt only got to Canberra this morning. He's been with his community over the last few days, helping them up in the Cape York deal with the impacts of Cyclone Narelle. I also know, as a player in the US of basketball, he saw firsthand the punishing effects of a healthcare system like America's. Bills for hundreds of thousands of dollars to treat serious basketball injuries. And that's one of the reasons why he has been such a strong supporter of our Stronger Medicare plan. And it's delivering for his community in Leichhardt. More than 60% of general practices today are bulk billing 100% of their patients. And almost 40,000 people have already gone through the Cairns South Urgent Care Clinic since it opened in 2023. Indeed, the member can attest to the high-quality care there, because he was treated there when he was bitten by a white-tailed spider quite recently. But, Mr Speaker, I know he was especially proud, especially delighted last week to open the Medicare urgent care clinic in Cairns North, Mr Speaker, he promised at the last election. There are now 134 Medicare urgent care clinics open after the Prime Minister opened the Coburg Clinic in Melbourne over the weekend, and already they've seen more than 2.7 million Australians, every single one of whom has been bulk billed, Mr Speaker. But let's be clear, this is a Labor vision. This is a Labor program. The Shadow Treasurer, now the opposition leader, a couple of years ago described it as wasteful spending, Mr Speaker, and now on his website says nothing about Medicare or health, Mr Speaker. So I thought I'd have a look at the third right-wing party's policies about this, after Senator Hanson said earlier today that there's a heap of policy for Pauline Hanson's One Nation party. You just have to go to their website. So I did go to their website, Mr Speaker, and I clicked on health on onenation.org.au, and there are 4 lines in their health policy, and to their credit, they mention improving regional healthcare services by paying the HECS and HELP debt of recent doctor graduates. I'm pretty sure we're doing that, though, Minister for Education. There's not a single reference to Medicare, not a single reference to bulk billing, not a single reference to urgent care clinics, not a single reference to cheaper medicines, which just goes to show, Mr Speaker, doesn't matter which flavour you pick from this potpourri, the tutti-frutti of right-wing parties that is available in Australia right now, you won't hear anything about a stronger Medicare.
The call to the honourable member for Fowler.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Treasurer, your government ignored my calls last term to halve the fuel excise to ease cost of living for families and small businesses. Now petrol and diesel are surging towards $3 a litre, yet your government is still taking $27 billion in fuel excise from struggling Australians. Why won't you halve the excise to provide immediate relief and curb inflation like the previous government did? Surely there's never been a more critical time to act.
The call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question, and for the bulk of my answer I refer her to the answer I gave to her colleague, the member for Mayo. But in addition, I would point out, Mr Speaker, in acknowledging the very real cost of living pressures being felt in Fowler and indeed around the country, that the government is providing cost of living relief in a number of different ways to her local community. 65,000 taxpayers are getting a tax cut, actually getting 2 more tax cuts because of this government. Those opposite voted against them and said they'd repeal it. About 8,000 people in her community getting a boost to their superannuation. More than 23,000 people are getting student debt relief. When it comes to the PBS co-payment reduction, more than $5.9 million in savings in her electorate alone, 416,000 scripts. The safety net reduction, $5.8 million in savings across 773,000 scripts. The Medicare urgent care clinic in Liverpool, pay tribute to the Health Minister and the Prime Minister for delivering that. New bulk billing clinics, including 9 additional practices in the member for Fowler's electorate. So we're providing cost of living help in other ways, Mr Speaker, and I've concluded my answer.
Give a call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. How is the Albanese Labor government continuing to deliver for Australian small businesses in the face of global uncertainty?
A call to the Minister for International Development, the Minister for Small Business and the Minister for Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I really want to thank the member for Canberra and welcome her back to this place after her period of maternity leave. And I want to thank her also for fighting for small businesses in Canberra. Small businesses like one of my favourites, Fancy Yarns. Fancy Yarns is run by the owners Kat and John, and they recently held another amazing Australian yarn show event right here in Canberra. It's an annual event that showcases small businesses in the yarn industry, from producers through to retailers and creatives as well. So I wanted to give them a bit of a shout-out. The Albanese government understands how important small businesses are, and we're ensuring that small businesses have the right conditions in place, not just to survive but also to thrive. And since we came to government, Mr Speaker, Australians have established more than 26,000 new small businesses every month. And behind that figure, there are visionary individuals who take an idea or they take a passion and they turn it into a business that employs people, that supplies critical goods and services, and a business that builds communities. Our National Small Business Strategy, the first of its kind, means that we're working closely with states and territories across 3 essential pillars: supporting small businesses to grow, levelling the playing field for them, and easing the pressure on small businesses. But we know that running a small business can be tough, and I know that members on this side of the House who have run small businesses know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's even tougher when you don't know what's around the corner, when unexpected price shocks or supply shortages throw you curveballs. Now, Mr Speaker, you've heard the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and other ministers talk here about shielding Australians from the worst of global uncertainty. And we are working as a team across portfolios to deliver for small businesses and ensure that they too are shielded from the worst of global uncertainty. We're ensuring that they're able to take advantage of Australia's transition to renewable energy, and I'm pleased to inform the House that the latest draft default market offer proposes that small business electricity costs could actually drop by as much as 21%. We're also ensuring that they can reduce their energy costs by accessing the Home Battery program, which thousands already have done. We're boosting fuel supply, amending fuel standards, working with industry and international partners, and including, as the Minister announced earlier today, including the standards for diesel as well. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we remain focused on delivery, particularly in the face of global uncertainty. We are the party for small business.
To the Prime Minister. Prime Minister has the floor. Order.
I ask further questions to be placed on the notice paper.